Hopefully that won't be too disruptive. I want to welcome you. My name is Joanne Wastar. I'm the Associate Director of the Women's Center. And along with the Women's Commission, we're excited to be kicking off this year's Her Story series. We're in our 9th year of sharing stories of women leaders on campus. So Professor Griffin has been graciously agreed to share her story today. The format is informal, so if you would like, if you have a lunch, you may gladly eat your lunch. Also at the end, we'll leave some time for question and answers. So if you have some, please jot it down. I know she's more than willing to answer that. So this is the time I always shamelessly share upcoming stories. We have another Her Story on November 27th, which will be Nancy Giardina, and that will be back in the room across the hall, room 2263. We also have, it's for the Women's Center, it's Dating and Domestic Violence Awareness Month in October, and the brochures are in the middle of your table, so the programs are outlined there, so please consider attending some of those. Also, before we start, we may have run out, but if you received an evaluation, if you could take that out a minute. Do I see people taking them out? If you would just fill out the back so that if you, at the end of the program, then you can just complete the front, and LaToya, our student volunteer, will collect those at the door. So we really appreciate your feedback and you taking the time to complete those evaluations. So on to today's speaker. Today's presenter is Carol Griffin. She is a faculty member in the biology department. She's also director of the Gen Ed department here at Grand Valley. She received both her PhD and her MS from the State University of New York. And I found this interesting. She has her bachelor's in business administration from North Dakota State, which is located in Fargo, North Dakota. So there must be a little story of business, North Dakota, then New York for her PhD. Carol is known to friends, family, and colleagues as Griff. She loves anything to do, as you can see, with the outdoors. I happen to know hiking, biking, running, swimming, those are just to name a few. She has boundless energy and a great sense of humor. She's always a pleasure to be around, so please join me in welcoming Griff.
Thank you. So you can, if for any reason I forget to tell you where a picture is, you can just ask while they're going along. So I'll splice in random pictures during this talk. This was one of those really hard talks because it's like, what would anybody want to know about your life or how you got to where you are? So it'll be disjointed because some of it happens chronologically and some of it doesn't. This particular picture is Maroon Bells just outside of Aspen, Colorado. So I am who I am. Somehow I was driving into work and I thought, God, I think Popeye says that. And I was like, oh, I wonder if I meant that. Oh, well. So what you'll see is you'll see a bunch of things in this presentation, a combination of experiences, people, places, and different times in my life. And sometimes you'll see that a bunch of learning happened when I wasn't good at something as opposed to when I was good at something. Anybody figure out what this little hummingbird is doing? He's smoking a crack pipe. Correct. So my friend Whitney Burns Arlino, when she first met me, said, God, you're like a hummingbird on crack. And I thought, I wonder if that's good or bad. So this presentation will look a lot like a hummingbird on crack. I'm going to tell the story in chapters, partially because towards the end, I had a bunch of things change in my life in the last year, and they were really hard things. And so it becomes hard to think about starting all over. And then I read something in the New York Times. They were talking to people who had retired, and they said, oh, the way to look at your life was a series of chapters, which made it way easier to keep going on after having hard things happen. So here we go. North Dakota. The typical thing that people say when they meet you and you find out you're from North Dakota is, I've never met anyone from North Dakota, just like this cartoon says, and that really is what people say. If any of you were my friends like outside of Grand Valley, my email address is griffinc, no trees. And people are like, why do you have no trees? Well, prairies don't have trees. I hate trees. I hate green. And here I am in a state full of those claustrophobic trees which are hiding bears, wolves, and all those other things. I take my students out to see this in western Colorado, and they completely freak out because there's no, the bears and the wolves will be coming at them, and how will they hide behind the trees? And so for me, it was some pretty clear evidence that what you like in some instances is a product of what you were raised in, what the kind of environment you were raised in. So I am who I am in part because of my family. Excuse me. My mom, who taught me great attention to detail, she was really handy with quilting and stuff like that. I have none of those skills at all. But she was a perfectionist when it came to that stuff. And so I really did get that. It's not done until it's perfect, which means my writing takes for absolutely ever to get done because it's just not perfect. Even something that's been published, I find myself going back and going, ooh, I could have put a better word in here. So all the little writing people in the universe are very happy to hear that there's this perpetual editing thing. My dad, it's funny, he knew I was not going to be, at that time, a secretary, but he was bent on the fact that I was going to take typing in high school. I'm like, really? I'm not going to be a secretary. And he said, it doesn't matter. You need to know how to type. And he was right, because there have been lots and lots of people that I encountered later in life that couldn't type at all, except one finger at a time, and it's really tedious to do that. He treated me like one of my three brothers, and that's not to belittle that. That really is to say he ended up not thinking that I could do anything or should do anything any different than my brothers did. So my brothers, anybody else have three brothers? What an exciting life you have. You learn how to fight back, you learn how to stand your ground, you learned how to argue with them, and at the end of the day, they were a really valuable part of my growing up. Two of them live in North Dakota, the two guys on the left, and the guy to the right, he'll show up later in the story as one of the challenges that I've had to deal with in the last year. He lives in California. So there I was last night, rustling up things out of a scrapbook going, I cannot believe I did this. But part of my growing up really was being a Girl Scout, and it ends up being you're pretty achievement-oriented. You get those little widgets, right, every time you do something, the badges. And so some of that, I think, even in terms of doing triathlons and stuff, it's that, ooh, I can get another little widget. I can get another little race. The other thing it did for me is it really did, ingrain in you that be prepared, which works for both camping, but it really works for my job as well. I have to always be thinking ahead about what happens if this happens, or if this happens, or if this happens. You end up constantly having to think about that stuff. So we'll see who can find me first in this picture. Good luck. I know it's a really poor quality picture, but, well, that's the way the pictures were back then. Anybody want to hazard a guess as to even which row I'm in? No? Where are pigtails? I think this is me back here. Yeah, I think so. I had lighter colored hair when I was young. So one of the things that got me interested in the great outdoors was this experience. Somebody wrote a National Science Foundation grant to take people from the boondocks, North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, Minnesota, in little itty-bitty towns and say, you guys could become scientists, because you don't have very much for science labs, not much in the way of resources. So they went through this big old process, selected people, this group of students, and we went to South Dakota for a couple of weeks to a college campus, got some education about ecology, and then they took us backpacking in Montana, which, if you grew up in North Dakota, that was a huge, huge, huge change. I mean, even preparing for it physically was really hard. But that's really how I started loving the great outdoors, was through that experience when I was 15 years old. It's funny, I've got, you know, a host of pictures from that era, and I bring this picture into the class that I teach right now on wildland recreation management, because we talk about how things have changed. We would never have a group, for one thing, we would never have a group that's that large. If you looked at all of our hiking boots, you would go, oh my God, how did you ever get up the mountain in them? Because they're big, heavy things which have a big impact on the environment. We all have cut sticks, right, to use as walking poles. And there's a bunch of other things. Anyway, this is one of the things that defined my interest in the great outdoors. The other one, which was really, really, really big for me, you get to see lots of pictures of what I look like over time. I will tell you that I'm smaller now than I've been since I was 10. So I'm going to get bigger, I think, in some of these pictures. Yes. So there are a couple of guys who were really important to helping me do science projects, not the least of which was my dad. But there was a high school science teacher who, when I started doing high school science projects, he connected with the little college that was in our town with this guy named Archie Moore, and he got me a key to the science building as a high school student, so I could go down there and use all their equipment and do all my science projects, which today seems impossible that we would hand out keys to random high school students. But they really did a nice job of trying to mentor me through that process. My dad gets kudos because it's 20 below in North Dakota throughout much of the year, and I was taking water quality samples, and back then we had a hand auger. So my dad is going like this, drilling a hole through this much ice so I can get water samples on days when football games are happening. So I appreciate the fact that he did that. I did very, very well in science projects. From the time I was in grade school all the way up through high school. But they did a lot for me. And I'm sure they drove my parents crazy because I would ask why about everything, which I don't know how parents get through that. But they caused me to ask why about everything that happened, and then to search out the answer. And if I didn't know it, then I would have to go out and learn the material. And so it had to be relevant. I really struggled in high school chemistry. I did a terrible job in high school chemistry, yet I was doing these chemistry science projects, which I liked a lot, but I was motivated to learn that material that I needed to do it. The other thing I learned how to do, and this is important for the Gen Ed revision, which has taken us 5 years to revise the general education program, which most of you, we would wish, graduate in 4 years. It took us longer to revise the program than the amount of time you're supposed to be at this institution. So the science projects lasted a long time. They would build over the course of multiple years. And so that lesson about being able to persist for a long time was really important. The other one, which was weird for me, because I've got all these guys who are helping mentor me in high school, and you know, my dad's treated me like one of the guys, and all that's great. But I learned at some point that scientists who are women are unusual. They made this, I told you I did well in science projects, and I had gotten used to doing really well. I would get first place and lots of other awards for every science project. And I'm sitting there at this state science project, and you know, I've won some awards, and they've gone through third place, second place, first place, and I didn't win. And I'm thinking, God, you know, this is my junior year. I'm sure I should have won. Well, it turns out that I win this best senior engineering project. They call my name, and I'm sitting next to someone, and I'm like, I don't have an engineering project. And they're poking me and say, go up to the stage. I go up to the stage. the guy's giving me this award, and he said, and you're the first woman to ever win this award. And I'm thinking, how is that possible? And in retrospect, I think, really, no other women had won that award. And I wasn't even an engineer. But it's the first time that I began to appreciate the fact that there were not lots of women scientists, which will come up in a second. High school sports. So you'll see on the lower left all the little sporting activities that I did, and you'll think, and then you'll see the perfect 11th grade boy and girl, and on the right side you'll see athletic like Carol Griffin, and I'm telling you, I was a sucky athlete. I mean, I was terrible. I sat on the bench for basketball. I ripped my hands out all the time in gymnastics and was scared to death of flying off the little uneven bars. In track, I tried everything there was, and I was absolutely terrible, so I have no idea how that got up there. The only thing that I was good at was golf, right? And so I went to the state golf tournament when I was like in junior high, because I was a good golfer, but I didn't care about being a good golfer. So at some point, I give up golf, something I'm good at, for something I want to be good at, which is basketball, and I never was good at it. And so it was interesting at that point to say you can be good at something and still not want to do it, and it's okay to walk away from that. I grew up bait fishing with a worm with my family. We caught all kinds of fish. It was really easy to fish. I took up fly fishing, I don't know, about 5 years ago. I never catch fish. It's so hard to catch fish fly fishing. So I'm squishing the living guts out of this fish because I finally catch a fish fly fishing in Colorado. Anyway, it's not good to have the fish out of the water, and so I show that in class, and the students are amused. So one of the things I learned that has no relationship to the rest of this is that personal opinions matter. Somehow when I was in high school, I decided I was going to stop going to church. My parents, I have no idea why, said, okay, just go talk to the minister. If you can convince him, you're good to go. So I went in, had the conversation, and the minister said, yep, you shouldn't go to church. Well, it turns out that what happens is I get nominated to go to Girls State, and I barely make it in because people have heard that I stopped going to church. And I'm like, you are kidding. Well, and I am running against my best friend in high school to be the governor of Girls State. So it's not like I'm a bad person or not qualified to be at Girls State, but because of that personal opinion, and I hear that early on. I hear it again, but it's interesting. It was interesting for me to have that happen when I was in high school. Then, this is the only picture you're ever going to see of me in a dress. I'm going to burn this picture when we finish. So, I was in a sorority in college, which is, many people would say, unusual. So I ran this dual life in college. Our sorority was the smart athletic sorority. So here I am, because I had 3 brothers, being the quarterback of the flag football team. At the same time, I'm being involved in every student activity there is on campus, and while I'm doing that, I end up getting nominated to be the homecoming queen, which I thought was just insane. I'm like, this is not possible. So then I had to go do this style show. And so then he dressed me up. And at the same time, I was planning the parade for homecoming. I was planning the parade that I was going to ride in. Anyway, all of those college activities turned out to be really interesting. This picture has nothing to do with it other than I show it in class for things you should not do when you go to other countries. You should not pay kids walking down the beach because they take these little lizards out of places where they're supposed to live, and then they have a sad life. So one of the good things, I told you I was a terrible chemist, so I go off to college to be a chemistry major, and at some point I stopped studying because it was just boring. I knew what I wanted to do my PhD on, but it was boring, and I stopped studying. So this guy, he said, no, don't leave, stay a chemistry major. There were 3 of us, right? There were only 3 women in the entire chemistry program there. So losing a third of your women in one person was really hard. But he really did try to say, look, you can make it through college and still be a great researcher. He knew about my science projects background. But ultimately, I walked away from it. Eventually, I come back to it. One of the other people that became really important was a person who hired me and had me working in the Equal Opportunity Office for 3 of the 4 years that I was an undergraduate. She really gave me a lot of insights to what it was like to be an administrator, long before I ever thought I would be an administrator. She also taught the first and only women gender studies class I took. I can't believe she could teach it at the university. And one of the things that ended up happening as a result of hanging out with her is there was a time that something appeared in our college publication that had something to do with who pays your fees to go to college, and the correct answer in the crossword puzzle was dads, for which my response in the letter back to that professor was, as Wendy would say, hell to the no, right? Some dads do, but moms pay. I paid, right? That's not a good answer for that. And they actually did publish the letter, and the guy did say, oops. The other thing that I liked, so this is a triathlon picture. You Go Girl, the track bike company puts on a women's only triathlon in 10 or 12 different parts of the United States, and they're awesome events. It is awesome to show up and have 1,000 to 2,000 women competing because they're all cheering for each other. Some of them are highly competitive, and some of them are going, how will I ever get through one of those events? All the student activities that I did in college end up affecting what I do next. I mean, I do get a bachelor's degree in business, mostly because I can't think of anything else to major in at that point when I dropped out of chemistry. This is the Pacific Crest Trail. This is just a random segue. Part of who I am is I am an aunt, a mom, whatever. These are random kids in my life that have been in my life. And we're often doing dorky things. Anybody who knows me would not find any surprise about that I'm doing dorky things with kids. So chapter 4, I go off to graduate school to get a degree in student personnel administration. One thing I learned, and I always tell high school students when I go out and talk there, or college students, it's a horrible idea to go to an out-of-state school, because you can go into serious amounts of debt, and you could have gotten that degree somewhere in-state. And at the end of the day, having doubled or tripled or quadrupled the amount of money you borrowed takes a long time to pay that back. One of the things I do in Colorado is I hike. They have 54 14,000-foot peaks. This is the last 14,000-foot peak that I hiked. So now I start working eventually. I do dorky things even without kids. I don't need kids to do dorky things. So I worked at Indiana University after I graduated from there. I was an advisor for student activities, and what I learned was that it was really hard at the end of the day to know what it was that I had done. My job was to advise students who produced the end product. They produced the concert, the lecture, the film, whatever it was. And in a lot of ways, it's kind of like being the gen ed director. I don't really do anything. It's the committee that does stuff. So I learned early on how to do that. This is in London, that picture on the bottom. After that, I went to the University of Texas at Austin, and there was a woman there who said, you are going to do something other than be a program advisor. You're going to run this other program. I said, I don't want it. She said, you'll be good at it. And I said, I don't care. That's kind of like that golf thing. She said, you'll be good at it. And so I did it, and yeah, I did fine at it, but I didn't really want to do it. So at that point, then I returned back to my roots of being a scientist. This is in Sedona in the wintertime, my friends and I. So I go back. This is a cyclocross race. The first cyclocross race I did was Halloween. You have to dress up in costumes. I like Tigger. I wanted to be a Tigger. And instead, I ended up with a lady of the evening kind of outfit, which is not exact. So I stuffed balloons in because it wasn't going to look like Tigger at all. When I go to SUNY ESF, it's one of those places where almost everyone there is a man, every faculty there. They did a campus study for women, and there were a host of things that people learned about what female students wanted, needed, that often it turned out the male faculty members didn't even know. If you're a guy, it doesn't occur to you that peeing in the woods when you're on a field trip takes longer if you're a woman than a guy, which means you have to allow more time on those breaks. Right, little things like that. And so that was a really interesting exposure to, gosh, who knew that people didn't know that? If you're a woman, you know that. My very best professor of all time, and again, this is when there are only 5 women, we knew them all. She taught a course in gender and science, and she totally got beat up for teaching that course. But she was the kind of teacher that I really wanted to be, and she really, more than anyone, inspired me to be a professor. And then John Fellman, he had incredibly high expectations for students, and it didn't matter if you didn't think you could do it. You could do it, and you were going to do it, because that's what the world expected out of you. Eventually, I finally get out of school with now 2 master's degrees. I have one in student personnel, one in environmental science, and a PhD in environmental science. And now I go to work in Idaho. This picture is in Phoenix. One of the things I learned was that you can teach things that you're not necessarily prepared to teach if you're willing to put in the work. I worked for a nonprofit organization. That was immensely valuable to me in terms of giving me stories to tell in class and to give me research ideas. Finally, I end up at GVSU. The picture to the right is one of those Muddy Buddy events. It was great fun. The picture to the left is I went to Nepal and to climb to Everest Base Camp. So at this point, the story stops being linear, and it's just a series of people who have influenced my life. You'll always see the picture of the person up on the top, and then you'll see some dumb picture. This one down below is one of the field trips that I teach. So my first boss in the college that I'm in now, Wendy Wanner, she hired me. I have no idea why, because I don't know why she would have thought a scientist was going to be a good gen ed director, because it was the complete opposite of the way she was. But for some reason, she saw that that fit would work. She taught me how to look at the big picture. The best part for me was that she was not a micromanager. And she just basically said, how can I help? If you need help, let me know. Otherwise, have at it. And so that was really useful for me as an administrator. So I alternate between the hummingbird on crack, AKA Tigger, and then occasionally I need to stop and do the Winnie the Pooh part. This would be all the kids in my life, where I need to sit there and think, how will I get through this problem? So those 2 stickers sit on just above my computer so that I actually make sure I'm not always being Tigger, that I do some of those other thinking hard stuff. Dude, Susan. Susan was really swallowing an icicle at a ski resort in Colorado. Susan taught me how to pay attention to the personal part of people, like people have birthdays, people start new jobs, what are you doing about that? And it's like, oh, right, all those are like, oh, those are really important things. And I will never do it as well as Susan does, but I aspire to do better at it. Shaylee, who I was the assistant chair in biology before I came over as the gen ed director, she really did model efficient and effective meetings, and she honed my skills at debating the thing we should do. So both I was the devil's advocate and she was. This is one of the 14ers that I climbed in Colorado. This is the picture at Everest Base Camp when we made it to 17,256 feet. This is the merry band of people. Chick gets up there for teaching me how to solve things systematically instead of individually. I can't run a gen ed program one student at a time. I have to figure out some computerized way. And there's also a reasonable test that I've employed in terms of being the gen ed director, which the details won't make much sense to you. My friend Maria, who always says, do you know me at all? And part of the answer is, when I'm talking to other people, it's like, really, I don't know them. And it's a reminder all over again that I don't know where they're coming from, so I try to keep mind of that. This is a little, I don't know what kind of animal it is. I could ask a real biologist what the skeleton was. She was one of the few logical people that I came across in gen ed, and she, because of her position in the university, she really does run interference for me. That makes my job as the gen ed director much easier. My friend Julie. There's actually Julie in the background. They happened to come out visiting, she and David, in Colorado, and I saw the biggest mica load I'd ever seen, and so my face is like shocked at it. But she really did endure the learning curve more than anyone else had to in terms of how we do assessment at Grand Valley and what its utility is. She also taught me to be pretty zen-like and stop worrying about things. That is not to say I don't worry about things, but it's actually, I could worry about them in a much different way. And the velvet hammer was some of how I work with faculty. We're trying not to ever clobber faculty. It may be that we have the ability to do that, but we're not ever going to do that in gen ed. Nancy G. These are two undergraduate researchers that worked with me a couple of summers ago, and she always says, what's best for the students, which often is not what's best for the faculty. So, but her head is always on what's best for the students, so I try to think about that. She also asked me, what do I want to do when I grow up, which that will show up later in the video. Wendy, my friend with the hell to the no, which there's a story behind that, which is not mine, or it's from where she was. She reminds me over and over there are other colleges out there besides Grand Valley that actually do things differently. Sometimes they're better, sometimes they're worse, but there is a life beyond Grand Valley. She's always optimistic and cheery. I told you I had a long, tough year, and she helped get through that. And then I do triathlons, and she's my swimming buddy. She swims whatever my coach says to swim, which is really great. That's me getting ready to go do an open water swim after mountain biking. I love that picture. This is me doing Iceman, which is one of those incredibly bizarro races. I signed up the first year because somebody was sick. It's a 3-hour mountain bike race. I never had sat on my bike for 2 hours, and I certainly had never sat on my mountain bike for 3 hours. But anyway, I've done 2 of them. I'm going to do another one. I had 3 helpful little elves who made my job as the gen ed director seem really easy. Both Colleen was the first one, Krista was the second one, and Sarah's the third one. It sounds like I've been through a lot of people. That's not really how it goes. But they really are the backbone behind any success that I've ever had as the gen ed director, because I really couldn't do things without them. And Gail, because she really does have confidence in the faculty committee that I work with, and whenever I hear her talk, I think, oh my gosh, I could be doing so much more. I mean, I walk out of there feeling guilty. I'm not doing enough. Not in a bad way, but in a, oh my gosh, let's get hopping. I thought I took that out of the other one. And then there's a bazillion other people in the universe, and that's just the beginning of all the people who have influenced how I come to be an administrator and my world views. The second to the last chapter is teaching. I'm the 5th one back on that picture. I teach field trips out to Colorado and New Mexico. And there's another class of the students. I'm in the back row. And GVSU supports the weird classes that I teach, which are those field trips and the backpacking class. And it's really great that I can do my administrative job and continue to teach those weird classes, because they're really important for me And they also allow me to connect with the students, and they allow the students to know me as something other than a weird professor. Triathlons, my coach over there on the right, she's the one who pushes me harder and harder and harder. And she knows I'm a scientist, and she has spent a long time, long 3 months, trying to convince me not to do things based on science, to do things based on feel, which is really hard because I want to analyze everything. And she's like, you could just be more Zen-like about it. You could just, chill. That's not going so well. She's done well. I went to the Sprint National Championships in 2011 and again this last August, and qualified for the World Sprint the World Sprint Championship in New Zealand in October, and then in London next September. What they do for me is they make it. Initially, it was just on a whim that I would do it, and then the training helped me get through really hard times. I got a divorce after being with somebody for 14 years, which was really, really hard. And then my little brother on the left, he looks much different from the picture you would have seen much earlier. He got a disease that was just, they pronounced him dead 3 times running since Christmas. And so it's been a really tough year. And going out and training all the time helped. It enabled me to cope with really hard things. One of the ways I get through the little triathlon, though, is that little Pac-Man guy. I just sit there and look at the people in front of me, and I try to be a little Pac-Man and just gobble after people, so that's why that is. So that's the cheery part of that thing. And back to Nancy, what do you want to do when you grow up? Well, my answer remains, I dream of being a superhero. This little kid is in a towel. It's an ad for a towel company, but I don't really know what I'll do when I grow up. I still think I'm 22 or something. And the only reason I really know how old I am is because I do triathlons, and they plaster your name on your age on the back of your calf because they're 5-year age groups. So now I know how old I am, and it's like, wow, I'm really not 22. So I have no idea what I'll do when I grow up. I have no idea what the next step will be. Why? You mean because you're competing with that in that 5-year age? Why?
Because if something happens to you, they could say a female age 50
Oh,
fallen down. And
who knew? I thought it was just for the competition part of it. Excellent, excellent. I, of course, wouldn't know my name. And I love this picture because that really is kind of the way life goes. It's a conglomeration of all those experiences that you've had, all the things that I've done and felt that have made me who I am today and who I will become tomorrow. At different points, the blue is higher than the green. At some points, the red is higher than the green. It's just the way life works, and that's my story, and I'm sticking with it. So thanks for listening.
Then I want to thank you for joining us again today. Hopefully you've learned through the Her Story series is how do we connect with mentors that help us along our life journeys. We all have those stories. For those of you who did receive an evaluation, if you would please complete that. We do look to that and take any feedback you put on those for future programs. Otherwise, again, there's flyers in the middle of your table. Please take some of those along. And we also included, last year was the Women's Center 10th anniversary. And I did include in the middle of the table one of our 10th anniversary reports that you may take with you if you like. But thank you, Griff, for sharing your story today and tying in how important mentors along the way have been to your life journey. So join me in thanking her again. Oh, and Latoya, you want to raise your hand. She'll collect your eval, okay?